So one more session, and then Jim Lockhead is going to give us a keynote that I know will be super interesting. So my name again is Brad Udall. I'm a senior water and climate research scientist and scholar at the Water Center here, and my wife regularly reminds me that only 3 words in that great title are really true. She says I work on water and climate, and I'm really senior. So we have a panel of 3, and we're going to do this slightly different than what we've done before. Let me lay out how this is going to work. So Eric Kuhn is going to talk. Then Preston from the Ute Mountain Utes is going to present remotely, and then Sunshine Swetnam will wrap us up. After Eric, we're going to do questions, and after Mike, we're going to do questions, thereby giving Sunshine her whole time, which will be a little bit different than anything you've seen so far today. So I'm going to introduce each one of these before their talk, not as a blanket ahead of the panel. And so it's my pleasure first to introduce Eric Kuhn. Eric's formerly the general manager of the Colorado River Water Conservation District, DCASE entity, and he served in that position for decades. He remains very active in Colorado River policy and science issues. And I've often heard him in recent years humbly introduce himself as just an author, but what an author. And that introduction also does no justice to his former career there as the general manager. His book, Science Be Damned, How Inconvenient Science Drained the Colorado River, is a must read if you're interested in what goes on in this basin. And Eric could moonlight as an attorney, he could moonlight as a hydrologist, he could moonlight as an engineer. He's really a unique man in the basin. And so with that, I'm going to let Eric give us his idea about the future of the Colorado River.
Yeah, and some would say I could moonlight as a manager of the River District for many years as well. Well, thank you, and thank Colorado Water Center for inviting me. It's been a great program. I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, we have an interesting situation on the Colorado River, and this is the book that John Fleck and I did. And you know, my thoughts on doing this, besides, you know, having a project after I retired, was there's a lot that's written about the Colorado River Compact. I mean, there's quite a bit. And Norris Hundley Jr., I think he was a historian at UCLA, did a great job of writing about the politics. And his book is called Water in the West, which is a detailed if you want to call it, book on how they got together to do the compact, the issues, what were the political issues in each of the states. And it's a great resource. And I've had that book for years. I read it a lot to kind of refresh my mind on it, on the whole matter. And one of the things I noticed is that he really wasn't coming at it he missed the hydrology. He missed what did we know about the river and how we use that. And so we started delving into that, and we realized that a lot of what we thought we knew, or when I came into the business, what we thought we knew, that the compact negotiators did the best they could, but they had the unfortunate problem of having 20 years of a wet record in front of them. That was true. They had 20 years of a wet record, but what isn't true is they could have known and really should have known, and there were a couple of scientists from the USGS, and there was a panel led by a retired lieutenant general in the Army Corps of Engineers that was responsible for building, up until then, the largest dam in the world, which was a part of the Panama Canal, that said, your estimates are way off, and your philosophy is wrong. You should be conservative in allocating this water, not promising more than what might be there. And this was before this compact was ratified. It was after the compact was signed, but it was before it was ratified. So our goal was trying to address how we use the science in these major decisions. You know, now what we're supposed to talk about today, and I'm going to, is a little bit about looking forward. Because I think looking forward, that era is over, and it's all going to be about hydrology. It's not going to be so much about the compact as it is about what we know or don't know about the hydrology. And managing for deep uncertainty is going to replace managing for certainty, which was the goal of the compact negotiators. Give the states certainty. Give the Congress certainty if they authorized and appropriated a project, that it would have water, and those water users that were going to rely on it had some understanding of what they were going to get. So I've shown here river flows a century ago versus today. And this is from Delph Carpenter's report. On December 15th, 1922, shortly, about 3 weeks after Carpenter signed the compact, he wrote a very detailed report to the governor and the General Assembly recommending they ratify it, which they did a few months later. But when you look at his understanding of the hydrology, he thought, and this is natural flow, they called it virgin at the time. This whole concept of natural flow, virgin flow, those kinds of things, you see from the minutes in the record, this was new. This was stuff they really didn't understand. A few of the hydrologists did, but the decision makers, we use that today all the time, they really didn't understand it. And it's clear that Carpenter and his advisors really had some fundamental flaws in how they understood it. But he thought the flow at Lee Ferry was 17.5 million. Below Lee Ferry, 3 million. Answer, there was a question about 3 million earlier today. To be honest, the Salt River, the Gila River systems were pretty good size in those days. They've been really hammered by climate change, but there's also the Virgin, and the Little Colorado and the Bill Williams. So the 3 million that was discussed this morning was the total lower basin tributaries. Then there's a total of 20. They authorized, or they apportioned 16. They left a surplus of 4.5. And as mentioned earlier, that 4.5 was, part of that was supposed to would go to Mexico once there was a treaty. Now, if we were to do that today, and I'm rounding off to rounding up or down to the nearest 500,000 acre feet. That flow at Lee Ferry is about 12. That's 21st century. Below Lee Ferry, maybe it's 1. We really don't know what the natural flow of the Gila River is, given what's changed down there. But it's not very much. It's definitely not 3 million. So there's a total of 3. So, and we've also given Mexico 1.5 million into 44 treaties. So we've done a swing. If you follow polls, there's a big swing in this from a surplus of 4.5 million to a deficit of 4.5 million. So we've legally allocated far more water than is in the river. Next slide, please. I guess I do that, don't I? Okay. Now, I want to talk about Colorado's particular problem. And I'll just quickly, and we talk about this in the book, but as our understanding, every year we went, or every decade, we thought the flow, and this is at Yuma, this isn't at Lee's Ferry. I think we make a mistake. It's easy by focusing on Lee Ferry. We really should be focusing on what's the total water supply for the basin. You can see it's gone from over 20 down to 13. And at every decade or so, it went down by 1 million or so. Now, one of the upper basin's problems is this. Clifford Stone was the first director of the CWCB. He was there for a while. He was there from the 30s to the early 50s. He was the upper basin's compact commissioner. He, in some ways, was a colleague, a contemporary of Carpenter. Stone was not around during the negotiations of the compact. He was a judge in Gunnison at the time. He didn't become politically active in water until the late 20s, early 30s, but he had plenty of time to talk to Carpenter while Carpenter was still relatively, was in good health when he was failing, but you could still have a conversation with him when Stone had many meetings with him. But here's what Stone said. Well, the 1922 compact apportions to the upper basin the beneficial consumptive use of 7.5 million acre feet annually. Such use is subject to the availability of water. The states of the upper division are required by the compact to maintain certain flows at Lee Ferry. The water available for use in the upper basin is that remaining after the Lee Ferry delivery requirements are satisfied. That remaining. So we get what's left. And that's the problem in the upper basin with a squeezing supply. Now, I will want to make a comment here, and this is just as a historian. This concept we have of a non-depletion obligation, well, Carpenter called it a guarantee. Clifford Stone, I don't think he wasn't all that concerned about the words. He called them delivery obligations. Felix Sparks, who was a CWCB director, and when I first started on the engineering committee of the UCRC, which I left after I retired, Felix was the compact negotiator. Felix didn't suffer fools when it came to wording. And they said, these are delivery obligations. I know I says it does not deplete, but don't try and fool me with your words. But the bottom line is the upper basin is being squeezed. The climate change is reducing the watershed runoff. The compacts have fixed obligations. You can argue about what, and maybe we will, argue about whether it's 75 million or maybe 82.5 because of the Mexican treaty obligation, or maybe something in between, maybe something more. Declining flows minus fixed obligations is the squeeze. Yeah, and Colorado gets 51.75% of a declining number into the future. So what do we do? Litigation, hopefully not. I don't see a court having any power to increase the flow of the river. Maybe some of them do think they do, but I don't think they do. So a litigation, I think it might be out there as a threat, but it's really not much of a threat. My prediction is we're not going to amend or negotiate the compact, but within a few years, maybe after the time we figured out how to get out of the current crisis, we're going to essentially ignore all the provisions of the compact. We disagree on about 75% of them anyway, but we're going to ignore all of the provisions except perhaps Article 1, which defines the purpose, and the signature page. So that's my prediction for the compact in the future. It's too hard to amend. We're not going to renegotiate it. We're just going to bend it. And John Fleck and I in our book called it the Pat Mulroy principle. The compact means whatever the 7 states in the United States agree that it says, no matter what the words are on the page. It's a little bit risky, but I think that's the direction we're heading. So with that, I'll take a question or two.
Any questions out there? And if not, Eric, well, a question's coming up. Let me ask you, Karen Kwan's interpretation of the non-depletion obligation is that the so-called delivery obligation was really to deal with drought, not with climate change, and that those are really different concepts. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, one of the interpretations of the compact could be Article 3C, and I hope the states consider this, is that the upper basin, which is only using, the numbers changing, but let's say 70%, 60-70% of its 7.5 million, which wasn't a supply of water. The apportionment was a limitation on appropriations that can impact the other basin. But let's not go into that. But let's just say that it's not the upper basin that's causing the problem because we're using far less than what we were apportioned. Now, that is a little bit risky. That essentially means that, what does that mean for every compact in the western United States that is subject to climate change? The Colorado River is not the only one. The Rio Grande, the Arkansas, the South Platte, the Bear River Compact, the Klamath. There are many compacts. So if this is an issue that they're going to take, and if this gets litigated, is the court going to say, let's open up every compact because climate change has changed? The bottom line is every river that's under a compact looks fundamentally different than what it did 60 to 100 years ago when it was negotiated. So that's one where I think they're going to let each of the compact states and the feds that are always a party negotiate what I think will be what works for that basin. And it's going to take some push and pull, and there's going to be some interesting side discussions and probably some interesting skirmishes.
So,
Brad, I've got a question.
go, Karen.
Eric, you talk a lot about the science that was used in your book when they did the compact. And we heard last week the Secretary of the Interior talk about best available science. How do you pick the best available science?
I think you use it all. I think that's the question for like when you're modeling, if there is some reasonable science that says that you're going to have a future river that's 10 or 11 million acre feet, you try to develop a method that could handle that. So I think it's least regrets. It's the kind of scenario planning that major users like Denver Water and Los Angeles Water and Power and MWD and do. I think you try to have a no regrets policy that will work for most, if not all, of the reasonable science. Hard to do, but you have to do it.
So I got a question. So the science behind the, how should I say, overly optimistic estimates of flow in the Colorado River, I mean, it's been out there for quite a while. But I got a question in regards to just, have you ever worked in or seen a water system, and mostly I've worked in the U.S., so I'm focusing on the U.S., that did not use overly optimistic estimates in allocating water supplies? Because honestly, I can't think of one that didn't just sort of say, let's use the most water we can possibly think of and allocate and deal with it later. So, I mean, it's almost like, in my mind, it's a fundamental law of water allocation, whether it's groundwater or surface water.
I think so. I think it's a fundamental law of hydrology and politics. The problem is it works in the federal budget because you can print money, you can't print water. Or I guess we did print water, but we found what good it was. We printed lots of water when we passed these bills, but we just found out that, it's not as easy to use. Oh,
Is there one more? Yeah.
So let's think about this from an economic perspective and think about the specific uses and how, for California's water, for example. So how would things be different, and what are the economic impacts going to be if all of a sudden we say, oh, well, California is only going to get, 6 million acre feet or something like that? One, what's that going to look like? And two, how is that going to go over with the public?
Well, the public question, how is it going to look like? I think it's looking like what it is today. We're already seeing that. You're going to see more reuse. You're going to see the Southern California is basically looking at a future where they import very little Colorado River water, and they rely more on reusing what they've got. Now, they're next to the ocean, so they can reuse. They can reuse it and reuse it. It's a little bit like that exported water from the West Slope. That has, so I think we're already seeing that. But the problem I see is going to be how do you put that with a law that provides first in time is first in right, and as DK said, first in time in many cases in Colorado is irrigation of pasture lands and some grasses and things like that that have very little economic value. And I also think what you're seeing on the Front Range, what you're seeing in the lower basin is moving to the upper basin, which is the Colorado River Basin is going to be, the future of the basin is going to be managing grass, turf, lawns, and grasses that have little economic value. And it's going to be tight.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.
All right, so our next speaker is remote, and we had hoped to have Chairman Hart from the Ute Mountain Utes, but we've got a great substitute, Mike Preston. Mike's currently the president of the corporation, which manages all the Ute Mountain Ute tribal enterprises. He's the former general manager of the Dolores Water Conservancy. He was chairman of the Southwest Basin Roundtable, and he has a long association with Fort Lewis College. Mike, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Brad. Yes, Chairman Manuel Hart sends his regards and regrettably couldn't make it today, so he kind of asked me to to lay the story out. And really what I'm going to talk about is the water future of the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, given the diminishing water supply that we've been talking about through this excellent program all morning. So the Colorado Ute Indian Water Rights Settlement was actually signed in 1986 and legislated in 1988. And a centerpiece of that settlement for the Ute Mountain Ute tribe was that the Ute Mountain Ute tribe subordinated water rights in the Mancos River, which runs right through the reservation and was dammed up without including them, for an allocation out of the Dolores project. And one of the things, one of the effects this had, I mean, the winner's right that they gave up was 1868. Once they held an allocation in the Dolores projects, and they're under a 1940 storage right. So some of the shortages that I'm going to talk about, that's really what's driving those shortages. So what the settlement brought, very importantly, brought drinkable water to the community of Toyoak for the first time in their history. I mean, when I first went down there, there were really stock tanks sitting in people's yards, and a water truck would back up and fill those tanks, and people would go out with buckets to get their potable water. So that, drinking water was an immediate breakthrough. The other thing was economic development. When the project was built, Wheat Construction Authority was formed and actually built the on-reservation portions of the Dolores project. Is still in operation today and highly successful. The other thing that came later was the casino, hotel, travel center. So lots of good results from this. The other big breakthrough, because the Winner's Doctrine entitles tribes for adequate water to fulfill the purposes of their reservation, they did really not have any agriculture to speak of. And so they got the 7,600 acre farm and ranch enterprise out of the settlement. And that's another one of my most enjoyable roles was project management development coordinator from 1988 to 1992. So the project initially, worked completely as intended. When we read through the definite plan report, reclamation using with the period of record that they used, and period of record is one of the things that Eric really brings out in his excellent book, indicated that there would be occasional shortages and no shortages more than 50%. So here we are as of 2021, and the tribe was able to build a highly efficient, highly productive, and profitable farm kind of with this water. I mean, what they gave up out of the Mancos, what they got in exchange was really infrastructure, allocated water out of McPhee Reservoir, and they had their ups and downs. There were shortage years, but by and large, it worked. Well, if you fast forward to 2021, the Ute Mountain Ute Farm and Ranch Enterprise had a 10% water supply. That means out of the 110 center pivots that are part of that project, only 10 of them were operating in 2021. Now that the deep shortages are a reality, I want to talk about how the tribal farm is adapting to this reality. So the first area is on adapting production. And we had a good discussion this morning about long-term ag sustainability. So the first step that the tribe had to take is to fallow 6,000 of their 7,600 acres, just because the water wasn't there to do anything more. And one of the things that's come out of that, is that they are, we're monitoring very carefully every field that's fallowed, what kind of treatment it received, what it cost, and how that field is responding when it's brought back into production. I think fallowing, unfortunately, is going to become more of a reality in the Colorado River Basin. So reclamation is quite interested in the monitoring that's going to happen on those fallowed lands. The other approach that they took, given the fact they only had 10 pivots, is where's the most value for the least water? And so in 2021, they devoted most of those center pivots to growing corn, because then, they had put together in 2006 a value-added bow and arrow brand corn mill, and they wanted to, had an expanding customer base. They had, employees there, so they wanted to keep that going. So they devoted, and it is, corn, I mean, alfalfa has always been the most profitable crop. Corn takes less water and feeds the value added at the mill. They saved enough of their hay to feed a cow herd. They have a very fine cow herd, but which has, over the last year has been reduced from 650 to 500 head. And they planted some triticale also as cattle feed. So it was a really tight year, 2021, net losses of a couple $1 million. And that's, they were enrolled in every conceivable, farm program, and still lost $2 million in 1 year. So, looking at 2022 now, they've got a 40% water supply. Unfortunately, that it was kind of late notice. I mean, we're happy to have the water, believe me. But it's that trend that was discussed this morning. Instead of that extra water that they have that bumped them up to 40%, didn't come out of the snowpack. It came out of the rains that have come over the summer, which had many other benefits, including, we dodged the bullet on forest fires for one thing. So the other thing, so what they did, kind of with what they're doing right now, because they're out there cultivating, as fast as they can. So they're going to produce more corn for the mill. They're going to plant corn. They're going to plant wheat for very unfortunate reasons. The price of wheat is high. They really got to bring in some crop revenue, and this is something that they can turn into revenue fairly quickly. They have a niche sunflower market that they had developed in the past, and they're going to bring that back just because sunflowers take about half as much water as as alfalfa. And then there were also good discussion on cover crops. So they're going to really this year they're going to test cover crops, and then next year they're going to get see what they learn and go further into it. In fact, as we speak, the manager, Simon Martinez, is at a meeting with the Land Institute talking about Kernza, which Perry brought up this morning, as one of the options. So that's one thing that they've done to make these adjustments, is really look at the relationship between water availability and their cropping pattern. The other thing is that they've used the production downtime. I mean, they've had to lay off half their employees. Instead of the farm had 30 employees, now it's got 15. Corn mill was pretty much able to stay in operation. They went from 15 to 12 employees, but they were able to take the employees that they retained, since there wasn't a lot of farming to do, and really improve system efficiencies looking to the future. In other words, Simon Martinez, the general manager, said, we're going to come out of this, more viable, at least from the standpoint of our infrastructure and facilities than we have been in the past. So this year they've replaced 10 25-year-old center pivots, done a lot of renozzling. So this was a state-of-the-art project when it was installed. It's got soil probes, moisture probes. They've got telemetry that they can operate and pace their, the movement of their pivots and everything. But they're bringing in even newer technology and doing renozzling. The other thing that we just commissioned, and actually there was a Commissioner of Ag and CWCB tour out there last week. They've got 3 micro hydro units commissioned that are right in their farm laterals that are actually going to provide power for the corn mill, their headquarters, and their pivots. There's another 7 of those kind of on the drawing board, but the first 3 worked out really well. And that's something that they're, an efficiency that they've been able to add in a way they've been able to keep people employed. They've got a project that's going to start as soon as the water shuts off to do a lot more sectionalizing valves. It's a very large, the project, 7,600 acres, pretty spread out, lots of laterals. And so what the sectionalizing is going to do is give them the ability to direct the water right where it's needed. So they're not having to pressure up, the whole system in order to operate a part of the project, because that may be at times in the, currently and in the future, that may be a reality. We've got a couple of infrastructure projects that we're working on. One is a small storage reservoir, about 1,000 acre feet at the end of the canal. I mentioned cattle. Cattle is an important part of their operation, very important to the Ute Mountain Ute people. They're cattle people. Farming was kind of new to them. The cattle, it's just a natural to them. And so by putting 1,000-acre-foot storage at the end of the canal, which sometimes gets over-delivered to, that 1,000 acre-feet can water their cattle over the winter, and it can also provide, be very valuable if we're going into a super dry year. To have an extra 1,000 acre-feet in storage would make a huge difference. The other thing that they're working on, they've got an 1868 water right in the San Juan River. It's an ag water right, 1,600 acre-feet. They can irrigate about 400 acres right down there in the Four Corners, and so they want to gear that to their cow herd and be able to take the pressure off the farm. Because again, when you've got a lot of alfalfa production, what they've always done is bring the cattle in the wintertime to graze off the alfalfa. This winter, in the last winter, that alfalfa was not there, so they're really trying to figure out what are some alternatives for their cattle. And then water efficient crops. The philosophy that they're proceeding with is more, as I mentioned before, more value with less water. So they're, and this is a changing scale. A couple of these examples, they're operating obviously pretty large center pivots, but they're looking at producing hemp seed, which appears to be a missing link in the hemp market, and something that they have success at in the past. This would be done, kind of on a smaller scale, and definitely produce, if they're successful at this and can produce certified seed, then they'll get more value for a great deal less water. They've just recently announced in the newspaper last week that there's a tribal grocery store going in, and one of the things they want to offer is fresh produce to their members, and the farm is capable. As far as food security, that farm could support the tribe if push come to shove. So they want to start making some of that fresh food available, both for long-term food security and the fact that it's a food desert in Toyoak. It's 15 miles to Cortez to go to the grocery store. And then, as I've mentioned, they're going to do a combination of, they're going to experiment with cover crops and rotational strategies. And, Perry, like I said, Perry mentioned Kernza, and so they're going to start working with the Lands Institute on that and other cover crops. So really what they're trying to do, looking to the future, is to mix and match cropping strategies to the available water supply. And the way that the general manager and the chairman talked about this, if for example, the water supply for a period of time dictates that instead of having 7,600 acres of commercial agriculture, they've only got enough water for 5,000 acres. The question is, what can be done with the other 2,600 acres to keep the land healthy and productive? And that's where we feel like the cover crops are a promising opportunity. So that's kind of my overview on how the tribe is adapting to these drought conditions, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
So we have time for just a few, maybe one or two questions. Mike, I'm struck by the discrepancy in your can-do attitude here and all these things you describe, and a water supply of 10% in one year and 40% in another. My hat is off to you, but those are some tough times you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a very, it's a really difficult situation. If you put it in context, they still have, the drinking water is there, the economic development water is there, and I think the optimistic outlook, and they had no farming, before the settlement and before the Dolores project, and so what they're going to try to, the attempt is to do as much as possible with whatever water they have available to them, and they've got really good relationships with all the agencies, kind of with the water community, and Chairman Hart, and he speaks often to this. He's really saying that we're all in this together. We have to solve this problem together. So they're bent on kind of doing their part a lot of renewable energy, climate change action on other parts of the tribe, but they still are wanting to keep that, the farm as viable as they possibly can. And even if the production is scaled back, the food security aspect of this is extremely important. So they're just, the optimism comes from, we're going to try to do the best we can with what we have available.
So Jennifer Gimble may have a question out here.
Yeah, Mike, actually, it's more of a comment. Brad and I, as was mentioned earlier, were in Santa Fe last week when a tribal member from New Mexico stood up and said, "We Native Americans have adapted. We're way ahead of you." And Mike, I think everything you described shows how much that tribe has adapted to the situation.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that is really important about tribes is water is life. I mean, that's how they open their section of the Colorado Water Plan, in the Colorado Water Plan, and in their, kind of in their basin plan. And they really, I mean, if you, the philosophy, and if you've ever heard kind of a tribal prayer, that water is not only for human use, but it's for all creatures and all plants. And so their whole outlook, long term, is really that water is a source of life for us and for every living thing on the earth. And we have to adapt and really do everything we can to take care of Mother Nature and the support that she provides.
Hey, thanks. We're going to need to move on. That was terrific. I visited the farm once. It was a real eye-opener. And if you ever have an opportunity to do that, I would encourage all of you to go there, provided the Ute Mountain Utes have the time to devote to your interest. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up with a little different deal here. And Sunshine Swetnam is going to wrap this up. She runs the Ski Area Management Master Certificate at CSU's Mountain Campus. And Dr. Swetnam, very much warm to my heart, measures her time on this planet in her bio by both whitewater seasons 24 and seasons spent skiing, which is actually 45. She's actively involved in teaching and researching innovations and adaptations needed by the ski industry to adapt to climate change. So Sunshine, it's all yours.
How's that? Can you guys hear this? Okay. So I may walk around. We'll see how it goes. I don't want to stand behind this because I think it's as tall as me, frankly. First of all, Jennifer, thank you so much for putting this on for all of us and creating a space for us to have a conversation. And practitioners and professors and researchers alike, thank you very much for being here. Students, I hope you're hungry and you're getting fed. I'm really happy you're here in the room with us. I've noticed we've had students come and go, and I need to say loudly, we need you. We need you to be here, and we need you to participate. And although you're younger than many of us, you're the future. And if we work together as a collaborative, I see lots of head nods. That's good. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take us on a review. I've been taking notes all day long. They're color-coded. It's been fun. I've been listening to the best of my ability, and I want to put it back to you, what we've heard so far and where we're at as a group, as a collective. And from there, I have some of my own thoughts and insights that I intuitively just want to share. Sound good? All right, here we go. All right, so raise your hand if you know what it's like to be poor, to not have money, to have lack, only two of us. That's surprising, folks. Raise your hand if you went to college, right? Raise your hand if you ate ramen in college. There it is, okay? I have a realtor friend of mine who is so Italian from Italy, and she said, Sunshine, why do you guys make lemonade out of lemons? I'm Italian, I make wine out of grapes, right? But that's what we're at right now. We need to make some lemonade. And sometimes when you're poor, you got to figure out how to make that lemonade through your own creativity. Are you guys with me? Am I making sense? Okay. So some of that, though, I mean, don't let me fool you. I love people, and I am kind of a gregarious soul, but it doesn't mean I'm not nervous up here. And I'm mostly saying that for the students that are watching me, but also for the rest of you that are my peers. I do get nervous too, right? And you got to get brave. You've got to get up there, okay? And you've got to talk about these things. And sometimes you might say something that's not the best or what everybody wants to hear, but speak from your heart and be honest. Be the real you, okay? So in this, what we've talked about is there seems to be a lower basin overuse. I've heard that throughout the day, all day. But it seems, even if one of them, which is one of my more favorite states, was latent to the game, all the states now are participating and working on this. California and Arizona are still fighting, from what I hear. And there are zones in this compact with different needs. The government has hostility still towards sovereigns, and that doesn't feel good. But there's an urgency in action, also in leading by example. Round robin, that's what I mean by getting brave, okay? So Dr. Latourie, I'm so sad she's not in this room right now. I don't think she is. What a cool lady. She's right, it's exactly a collective will. And from my own space, it's a consciousness. It's a massive consciousness where we all arrive at the same place from whatever tributary we came from, because it all still flows to the same sea, right? So it's a critical consciousness. There was talk about we need new verbiage in the system. We need new ways to describe new things. Yes, there's a need for data because science informs. We like science. But there's a need for ag because that's our food and that's how we live. From there are predictive integrative models that are really important that we need to help inform. And it's also important to acknowledge, and this is that bravery piece, we the humans. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I'm a social scientist. I'm in the human dimensions of natural resources department. We, the humans, the complicated ones, we created this beast. So now we got to figure out how we're going to deal with us. So I guess we're going to have to get brave and say some things that are going to be kind of hard to figure out. Am I still making sense? Cool. Thank you. So then we talked about some really interesting ideas like vapor technology, and apparently there's a conference we can go to now if we want to learn about that. It wasn't said earlier, but there's also conversation of how to use solar to desalinate and bring water in and let the sun do its work. And then we've talked a lot about supplemental supplies and regions taking care of their own because that's what they need to do. And that made me think about the airplane, right? How many of you have children? Quite a few of us, I imagine, yes. Aren't you supposed to put your mask on first if the plane's going down and then on your child? The whole idea is you're supposed to be able to take care of self, but then you do take care of the child. You don't ignore them. You don't just freak out and forget them. Any parent in their right mind knows, oh yeah, I'm gonna take care of my kid too. But you've gotta be breathing before you can help them breathe, right? Or a different version, you have to know how to love in order to love another. You've gotta be brave. Okay, let's see what else we have. We have protection for water. We want to protect our constituents. We want to protect our space. Similar concept of putting that mask on. Making good use of upper basin resources came out. Making good use of it, but not injuring others. Okay. We no longer, this is really important, if you haven't written anything down yet, this is the one thing to write down. We no longer have a stable long-term supply. We no longer do. And I don't know how we tell that to the lay, but we no longer do, and we do that by being brave and by talking about this with one another. Yes, there's rising temps and there's rising impacts. Doing okay, huh? Okay. There are junior rights that are at risk, and we've learned about those. with diversions on the western slope included. Yeah. So then there was a buzzword that kind of showed up that people maybe didn't want to hear, and when you said it, it was really brave. Curtailment, that was brave. That was a brave moment, because that's what we didn't want to hear. And if we rely on the haunches of what happened in the past to the now, that's right. They were planning with abundance in mind because they couldn't fast forward. Trust me, 100 years ago, they had no idea we were going to procreate this many of us. We're so complicated. We're such a mess, we the humans. Okay, let's see. All right, let me just turn my page. So, we've talked about education to the people on the ground, including children. That was your counterpart, right? Wolf, I believe. And tribal engagement and how important that is. So there are some groups on the ground inside of constituents. We were just talking Colorado at that point in time. If you're from another state, take note of it. Maybe it's also happening in your other state. But they're teaching beyond just one another. They're teaching beyond just the science. They're going to the community. They're getting brave. They're telling their people about it. And then they're taking it farther, and they're making sure there's engagement with their neighbors, which happens to be this tribal engagement. All right? So, Steve Wolf brought up some common issues, and I think it's important to repeat them and remember them. They were supply versus demand, better data collection so that it's congruent and we can all speak the same language to one another, resource planning, tribal engagement, dealing with aging infrastructure, using and protecting existing rights, and protecting all water users. Okay, so how do we adjust to new conditions and benefit? We need federal support, was what was being said at that point in time. So then finally, recreation, which is my realm, came up, and protecting recreation and environment. Raise your hand if you feel better if you get to play. You get to blow off a little steam. Please look around the room. It's a very human thing, you guys. I want to conserve too. I have dedicated a lifetime to teaching people how to take care of our planet. I really do believe that if you can love this place enough to want to take care of it, we might do a good job. But I've counted throughout the day, and we're kind of hovering between 65 and 85 people in the room at a time. So if you know how to do it, and I know how to do it, and we spread it like mercury and get brave about it, we might be able to make some ground. And I know that I have young children, not very young, but young children, and I know they know what to do already. I made sure of it through my own passion. I hope if you have grandchildren, cousins, nieces, that you take the time to generate our youth and foster them. You know, they did it for us 100 years ago. They didn't realize there'd be so many of us, but they did do it for us. It's our time, guys. This is for our grandchildren's grandchildren. This is time for us to do it. We can't wait for somebody else to do it. The time literally is now. Okay. All right, so we talked about collaboration and regional governing authorities and if that was a good idea or not. Somebody said it was also, it was Jennifer Gimbel. She said, we may be at odds, but we have to figure it out, and that's what's cool about Colorado. That's what she likes about here. You know, if that's the case, then I guess we're setting a precedent because we don't all have to agree on everything. We can agree to disagree and yet be civil and find a way forward, find the pathway forward. By the way, water always does find a pathway forward. It finds that path of least resistance. Yes, it does. Okay, so we don't want to ignore our provisions. We want to bend them and find a new pathway, which makes me think about maybe the abandoned meander or something like that, and how the river just keeps going, it still wins. I don't know about you, other than love, I do believe water is the most powerful thing on this planet. If you disagree with me, that's cool. I'm open to hearing about it, but that's what I believe, just based on my time on riverbanks and floating down rivers. Every river under a compact looks fundamentally different. You just said this a few minutes ago, and thank you for saying it, than it did 100 years ago. So that's the perspective. That's the theme I'm seeing, is that we really did give it a good go a while ago, our forefathers. Guess what? We're somebody's forefathers as well, and foremothers. We are. And now we get to take this ball and move it forward down the line. Just a few more thoughts. Doing good? Okay. So we talked about hydropolitics as well, and if it's okay to be overly optimistic, sure, but it's also okay to be overly realistic. Let's learn from the past. You know, that good intention was there. That's why these compacts existed. Maybe a little bit they existed so that those guys would be quiet. If we do this, then you'll get that later. All right? Then I would like to say that with the Ute Mountain Reservation, they're in a difficult situation with an optimistic outlook. I don't terribly want to rehash everything you just heard a few minutes ago. However, it occurs to me that they have adaptation on their forefront. It occurs to me they're doing what they can to innovate. It occurs to me they're making lemonade. You know, there's always sugar inside a lemonade. So they're replicating how to be in harmony with the nature they have. They are making lemonade with the nature they have. All right? A couple more thoughts. So it's been said to me, because I perceive myself as being in the trenches, and I'm okay with that. I'm comfortable with that. That you know what rolls downhill. It's been said to me, well, you know what? Think how fertile that land is at the bottom of the hill and how much you can grow. And here we are, guys, at the bottom of the hill. And we've got a lot of fertility. We've got a lot to work with. Not one of us has the answer. Not this group in this room has the answer. A critical mass, a collective of wills has the answer. All right? So I wonder if you noticed today who of us flowed in and who of us flowed out and why. I wonder if you thought to yourself, I bet you've been in that situation. I've got to go teach a class, I've got another meeting, I have an interview, whatever it may be. And who stayed in? Notice that like the water. Has it ever occurred to you what part of the water goes to the eddy and what part of the water stays in that main current? Which sticks float on the top and swirl around and which sticks get pinned under and stay under there for years? Think about it. Think about how water acts, because that might help us figure out how to find that collective mass. All right. So I'm wondering, there was a question of what are we doing wrong? And how do we communicate? Because it was that science, it was the research panel that asked that question. What are we doing wrong? I don't know that we're necessarily doing something wrong. As much as we've got this much, now we've got to figure out how to convey it to the mass, right? How to convey it, we've heard it to some children. How to convey it, like we've heard to some tribes. How to convey it to some politicians. We need to figure out how to talk about solving the problem. That's really what I hear today. How do we communicate with one another in a civil manner? So, last bit. What can we do? What actions can we take? We're taking an action right now by being in this room. We're taking an action by choosing to leave this room and talk about what we experienced. I've debated for a while if I'm going to tell you this, but I've decided to take a risk. I'm going to be brave. Tonight, as soon as I get done with this, I'm going to go to a hockey mom meeting, because that's what we do. And then I'm off to Aspen, Colorado. And I'm going to sit with the United Nations, and I'm going to talk to them as one of their mountain partnerships at Colorado State University. And we are going to talk about water. We are going to talk about how water is up high in the mountains and how it's hanging out up there and stays up there, and eventually it flows and goes where? Eventually, theoretically, to the sea. I have no idea what's going to happen. I do know I get to bring today with me. I get to share and represent what we have experienced in this room today, and I get to go give it to the world, and I've never gotten to do something like that before. And I promise you, as your colleague, as your teacher, as your friend, I will do my best to be honest and report what I did here in an objective manner today. To represent Colorado State University, to represent the state of Colorado, and I suppose today to represent the Living with the Colorado River Compact. That will be coming with me. As a result, you can talk to others. Youth outreach, whatever youth means in your brain. To me, the students on this campus are youth. Don't just pass it on, share it. Engage in conversations. Don't just tell them, ask them. Educate. Stay educated. Stay current. No pun intended. Be part of the process. Be aware of policy. Know what's happening. And talk about the critical mass. So respectfully, thank you for your time and your attention and choosing to be in this room. Thanks.
So I'm feeling pressured to wrap this up. I want to, please join me in thanking our panelists.